Hello, everyone. My name is Alexandre Pacheco da Silva, and this is Law and Technology series, a set of interviews with incredible scholars to discuss the impacts of new technologies in the legal field. I'm a law professor at São Paulo Law School at Getúlio Vargas Foundation and one of the coordinators of the Center for Education and Research in Innovation. Today, we have Professor Burkhard Schafer from Edinburgh Law School, where he teaches computational legal theory. He's also the co-founder and director of the Script Center for IT and IP Law, and Professor Schafer studied theory of science, logic, theoretical linguistics, philosophy, and law at Universities of Mainz, Munich, Florence, and Lancaster. His main field of interest is the interaction between law, science, and computer technology from a doctrinal, comparative, and legal theoretical perspectives. In his field, an interesting question that guides the studies is how can law, understood as a system, communicate with systems external to it? Most recently, he is involved with topics as creative informatics, computational creativity, emotional AI, among others. In 2018, we had the privilege to host Professor Schafer when he offered a short-term course on the legal regulation of AI in robotics as a part of the initiatives of the Global Law Program. He had a huge impact on our community during his time in our school, bringing discussions regarding law and technology. Thank you and to accepting our invitation and to be a part of this initiative, Professor. And my first question for you is, how, in your view, is technology impacting the legal field?
Okay, I think we have to broadly distinguish two very, very different types of impact. One is simply that technology infuses more and more aspects of our life, the way we do business, the way we live, the way we love. All of these aspects by now have very often a technological element. And that obviously creates, on the one hand, regulatory demands, but it also creates on the side of technology users uncertainty, concerns about legal aspects. So more and more often, practicing lawyers will be asked to give advice on legal questions for high-tech technology users. Many of them might not even be able to be particularly explicit or vocal about their concerns. We work a lot with startup companies through the Digital Catapult, for instance. These are very often just young PhD students trying to turn their ideas into a business. And they are vaguely aware that there might be legal pitfalls, but they can't really articulate what sort of concerns they have. And here I think we need a new type of lawyer skill that is not just responsive to a sort of complete and accurate fact statement and then tries to subsume it under the law, the way we very often still try to teach law students. Rather, you have to work with your client, work to find out exactly what sort of things do they do that is potentially of legal relevance and pertinence. So I think we need, as legal advisors and as regulators, a new type of skill, working with companies, trying to find out which of their practices give rise for concern. And these can be things that are sometimes deep into the supply chain or in the pipeline of an AI application, for instance. It might not be at the surface of it. It only becomes relevant or visible when you understand enough about the technology to ask the right questions. So that is, I think, one big field. And then there is the other one, the impact of technology on the practice of law itself. That increasingly, as lawyers, there are tools available to assist you in your work. That creates opportunities, but also, I would say, serious responsibilities and potentially also risks. So I think from a lawyer perspective, we face three types of challenges. To know which sort of technologies become so essential in our daily practice that not using them becomes a case of professional misconduct. Certain types of expectations that now need to be met and that require a degree of technological knowledge. Secondly, maybe more problematically, thinking about what technologies you can use or develop yourself that differentiate you in the market to do something other people do not do. So we are moving here beyond the baseline to, can I do something here that is unique, that suits us in particular ways? And then thirdly, I think the really big question, do we need to readjust much more radically what we mean with legal services and who offers them, and so what type of tools, so the more radical transformation of the legal services market. So these are for me the two main issues. On the one hand, we need to be able to work as lawyers in new and different ways with technology companies. And secondly, we also have to be aware of the transformation of our own work that happens through technology. And one of the interesting things I've seen very often is how lawyers can suddenly develop split personalities when it comes to that issue. So I've seen lawyers who were really good, rigorous, advising technological startup companies about their legal risks, very clearly identifying data protection risk, for instance, privacy risks, other type of legal obstacles. And then they are shown in a different context a new tool for their own law firm. And they immediately get over enthusiastic about the technology, and they never ever interrogate it in the same rigorous way that they would had they been asked to give legal advice here. And I found that puzzling, but I have seen it happening in practice quite a lot. So we have to be careful that we don't forget that we are also lawyers when we evaluate tools that are directed at us as users.
And Professor, I have a second question that I would like to bring some context to it. Usually we heard here in Brazil that the main purpose of a law school is to provide the students a way to develop a skill that we call, and other schools call as well, thinking like a lawyer or thinking as a lawyer. And my second question for you is there a field of study that we can call law and technology? Because usually here in Brazil, we will say that if you think as a lawyer, you can address questions regarding the regulation of technology. Because if you are a lawyer, you are able to face these new challenges. So my question is there an object for this new field? Or do you think that those lawyers are right?
No, I mean, that is obviously a very, very old question that comes up periodically. It goes back, if you like, to the early days of the internet, and when we had this big discussion, is there such a thing as an IT lawyer? Do we need that as a specific profession? And you will remember the famous paper, The Law of the Horse, where a judge argued we don't need IT law, we don't need that sort of thing because we also never had the law of the horse. This is just stupid specialization. What I always found quite interesting here that both he and then people who responded to him, like Larry Lessig, all accepted the underlying premise that we didn't have the law of the horse. And the only question was, is IT law so specialist, so narrow, that it would be a modern form of the law of the horse, or is it something that is genuinely different and requires different thinking styles? What I find interesting there is the premise is wrong. There was such a thing as a law of the horse. We taught it in Edinburgh as a separate subject right into the early 20th century. They had textbooks on the law of the horse. And that really should not surprise anyone because the horse was the most important form of transport. And essential for all aspects of life, for agriculture, for food production, for the military. So quite naturally, there was such a thing as a law of the horse. But leaving that historical vignette aside, what Lessig argued at the time was that we were seeing something here that went beyond a new field of knowledge, in the sense of environmental law is maybe a new field of knowledge, or European Union law became a new field of knowledge when the EU was created. but fields that by and large still use established legal methodology and practice to something that required a new way of thinking. And I think he quite brilliantly anticipated this new way of thinking about law, not just as text, at least not text directed as humans, but potentially software code. Code as a different type of expressing norms. And I think with that already we went on a trajectory that has become even more pressing, even more ubiquitous. And that for me is really a different aspect, a genuinely different aspect, a different way to think about the law that we didn't have before. This notion of how can we turn law from a order directed at a citizen to an order directed at a machine, imbue it directly into the infrastructure, blurring the lines of architecture, physical architecture, and the normative system that it creates. So I think that started already there, and that has become much, much more prominent. So I do think that at least parts of technology law require us to think slightly differently from the traditional skills of a lawyer. Where we see this, I think now getting almost into the next reiteration, is the increased interest in software code as a potential new form of legislating. At the moment, traditional parliaments, legislators still enact texts in written form. We can think of a future where, together with a written act, we get an authoritative translation of that act into a standardized software code. Because we already anticipate, or Parliament anticipates, that some of the audience, if you like, are going to be machines rather than humans. So here I think there's at least one aspect in technology law that genuinely sets it apart, creates a new way to think about the law and within the law. But that is only ever going to be a part of technology law. Not all of it is like that. And I think the skeptics also make an important point, that we are often too blinded by the apparent novelty of the technology and overlook historical continuities. We overlook that ultimately this is still about humans and their needs. And our needs have been constant for hundreds of thousands of years, probably. Our psychology hasn't changed that much either. So sometimes it's really helpful to step back and say, yeah, that looks novel. That's a technology, absolutely. But didn't we have something like that before? And again, let us go back to the law of the horse. We have surrounded ourselves by autonomous, intelligent, self-sufficient decision makers since the dawn of time. I would say it's a sign of human civilization that we were able to do that we were not any longer alone, that we had companion animals that we were using, but at the same time granting a degree of autonomy to. So I would say it's a good strategy when looking at autonomous cars and their regulation, smart cities, to say, well, hang on a second, maybe, just maybe, we can use very, very old ways of thinking to conceptualize what is going on if we look back in our past and realize that the normative concerns aren't actually not so different from something that we have encountered before.
Perfect. Thank you, Professor. And finally, my third question for you is, what should a law school do regarding the impacts of technology in the legal field? And just to give you some context regarding this question, we spoke with a lot of university during this period of isolation, during this hard period of thinking what would be the role of technology and what would be the role of those subjects in a law school curriculum. So, in your perspective, how should a law school create a strategy regarding technology in the legal field?
Okay, that's a really, really complex question. And one has here to be also obviously careful that for good reasons, legal education still tends to be specific to national cultures and traditions. So I mentioned at the beginning in the answer to your first question that we are increasingly seeing a sort of baseline where we think a competent lawyer must be able to use certain types of tools, and if not, they are delivering service that can't be justified any longer. And obviously the professional bodies, the Law Society in Scotland, the Law Society of England and Wales, and similar professional organizations will have a big role in setting up these types of minimum standards. The moment they do this, then obviously we as law schools have to respond to that. And that was always a sort of specific function, I think, of legal education, that we are a regulated profession in almost all countries. And we have to look at what our regulator thinks these minimum requirements are. By their very nature, because they are minimal requirements, they are not very exciting very often. They are quite boring, and teaching them, many will feel, is not entirely appropriate as part of a university degree, and I agree with that. So we have to think a little bit about, are there other ways to prepare lawyers for the use of these technologies that doesn't make them a separate subject? Our curriculum is already overcrowded as it is, and as I said, the intellectual excitement there would rightly make many colleagues say, well, no, this is not appropriate as a university subject. So we need to think a little bit, I would say, about the mode of teaching. Are there ways in which we can start to habituate lawyers in using certain types of techniques that simply happens inevitably and automatically as part of learning a traditional subject? So for instance, if I teach international law, making the students aware of automated translation and some of the risks that it raises, and novel ways to get to the law of a different jurisdiction. Do I make them aware? Do I integrate somehow advanced information retrieval as offered by LexisNexis to show them how they are now supposed to acquire information, the sort of things that are out there and that can be used? So I would not necessarily teach them as a separate subject. I would try to incorporate them, maybe having a more practice-oriented element here as well. Setting up law students as virtual law firms, where as part of an exercise, they simply have to use a case management tool and see how it works. So it doesn't come as a total surprise when they get that then in practice. So that is one aspect, I think. Changing not the content of our teaching, but the method, so that students are introduced to some tools, low-level tools, at an early level. And I think that is still a big hurdle. I mean, we had long discussions with the Law Society of Scotland about this over the last 2 years. What should we require from lawyers? What should we make mandatory part of their training, for instance? And it quickly turned out that given the range of law firms, from the very, very small one-person family law firm to the big international companies, the things they are using, the tools they are using, the resources they have are so diverse that it is very difficult to identify a single benchmark. And then also some words of caution we got from the lawyers who said, well, actually, look, you are talking here about AI. Let me tell you a story. I gave one of my trainees the job to do some billable hour work on a spreadsheet. And when I came to his desk, he was sitting with a huge piece of paper in front of the screen and writing out something. And I asked him, what are you doing? And he said, well, you know, I have to add up all these numbers. And so I copy them from the spreadsheet here on that piece of paper so that I can then use my pocket calculator to add them up. So the one thing spreadsheet is actually good at adding up numbers. He just didn't know that. He had never used even one of these really, really old tools in a law environment. And that is obviously a problem. So I think we need to use these things subtly in the background, just so that students are familiar with some of these. So that's the basics. Now, after that, we get this big divide in responses. Some are saying we really should teach coding for lawyers. We should teach technology for lawyers. We should give lawyers a general understanding in these issues together with informatics. And I've always been rather skeptical of that myself. We did it in the 1980s. We had the other big IT revolution at the time. I learned to program in COBOL. That was a total waste of my time and effort. I never ever used it again. By the time law schools have picked up on which languages to use, they're probably already outdated. And by the time people work in practice, all of that has become irrelevant. So I'm very skeptical to offer this as a mandatory course. There will always be some students who really like this and really want to do more about this, and we should enable them more to integrate that into the curriculum. But I don't think it is something everybody has to do. And there's a very different response to legal AI, and that says, okay, yes, legal tech will come. Certain business models for lawyers will disappear, certain income streams will dry up, and rightly so. We need to focus as lawyers not at becoming technologists. That's the job of the technologists. We have to focus on those things that technology will not do. And that includes soft skills, the ability to understand a client, to offer emotional support, to say the right thing at the right time, to be concerned about their well-being as one big set of skills. Law is here behind the medical profession. I'm always astonished to see how much since the 1980s medicine has started to incorporate soft skills as part of the curriculum. Bedside manners, how do I speak with a patient? We still massively neglect that in law, and I find that very regrettable. So that would be one other strategy. We teach empathy, we teach creativity, we teach all the skills computers are not going to be good at, and that makes lawyers resilient to technological change. That's another strategy. Has advantages, disadvantages. Empathy, I think, is teachable only to a certain extent. How you mark it, how you evaluate the success of your teaching is even more problematic. I mean, how do I evaluate if I made someone a good person? I don't know. So we have big problems there as well. To me, the answer would be a third. And I would say ultimately what we really need is jurisprudence, just taught in a new way. All the hard questions that these technologies raise, all the skills that we need, they are traditional concerns for legal theory. So let me use an example. I'm asked to work with a legal technologist to improve information management within my law firm. So they want to have a way to model the legal knowledge that we have cumulatively together created and make it more searchable. So they come to me and they say, okay, we have these great tools and we have these languages. This is roughly what they're doing. You now tell me what it is that you as a lawyer know that I should put into that machine. And with that, I ask the most basic question of legal theory. What is legal knowledge? What do I know when I know the law? What does that mean? Does it mean I have memorized rules? Does it mean I have a specific logical way of analysis? Does it mean I'm good at rhetoric? These are the perennial questions of legal theory. They are the questions the technologist will ask me. Tell me what it is that you call the law so that I can put parts of it on the machine. And then they put it on the machine and it does certain things to you. It does document review for you, or it automatically drafts contracts or executes them as a smart contract. And now you have to evaluate them. You have to say, okay, is this new technique good enough that it is professionally acceptable for me to use it? And for that, I need benchmarks. I need to know, how do I evaluate a piece of legal tech? Well, what do I do here? Well, I answer implicitly the question, what makes a good lawyer? And that is the second big question of legal theory, the normative, the evaluating one. How are you good at your job? What does it mean to be a good lawyer? Does it mean that I simply apply the law without thinking about the context, without thinking about power differentials, just following the rules? Is that what a good lawyer does? Or is being a good lawyer someone who pushes the meaning of the rules, argues a lot, sometimes in a gray area between rule bending and rule breaking? Is that what a good lawyer does? So if I want to evaluate legal tech, again, I need a framework for that. I need standards for that. And that is the job of legal philosophy. So if we think of legal philosophy as two answers or two questions, what is legal knowledge? What do we know when we know the law? And what makes a good lawyer? If we teach that with a view towards technology, and that requires to teach these things differently. At the moment, we still teach legal theory, legal philosophy way too much as knowledge about people. What did Dworkin say? What does Rawls mean? What do positivists argue? What are critically, we treat them as tribal communities and we learn about them. Whereas I would go step back and no, what are the real questions all these people try to answer? How would I apply this in the context of technology? How can I account for what I'm doing? So my personal answer would be we should teach much more legal theory, but we should teach it in a very specific way, not as information about what some famous people think, but how can I use this to solve this very deep problem in order to integrate technology into our justice system?
Thank you very much, Professor Schafer. It was wonderful. Thank you again to be a part of this initiative and for the interview. And for those that are watching us, thank you for watching and see you next time. Thank you, Professor.
See you indeed next time. Bye.